And we're finally here, Chapter 5. This is considered by many to be the hardest chapter in Fire Emblem Awakening, and I know I've hyped up the difficulty of some of the earlier chapters like 2, 3, and even Donald's Paralog, and honestly, most of the difficult chapters in Awakening are at the very start, but Chapter 5 is truly the biggest roadblock that any new player is going to encounter. As a result, I thought it was very important to take my time and make this guide as complete as possible. I don't want to throw shade at any other creators, but I do not believe that there currently exists a guide on YouTube that gives helpful advice for teaching new players how to understand and beat this chapter, or how to fully understand it in a way that's really educational, like the way my previous guides have been. If YouTube's search function even chooses to work at all, which is questionable, what people are mostly going to find are step-by-step instructions on how you can beat the chapter using a very, very exact strategy that also requires a very specific set of units. So not only do you have to follow what you're being told to the letter, but on top of that, you need to also raise the same exact characters in the same exact way for the first 4 chapters leading up to this, for those strategies to even work. And even if you're fine with that, most or all of those videos don't even have any commentary or explanation on what is happening. It's just a showcase of a clear that happened to work for the uploader and may or may not work for you when you try to copy it. Those resources weren't made for teaching, and that's fine, but my philosophy with these guides has always been to teach. So I want to make a guide with that focus in mind. I'll also mention that I've already done a stream where I walked through one of the older strategies that I previously used to clear this chapter with a lot of resetting, but a decent amount of consistency. I wouldn't recommend anyone to watch that stream. The strategy I use there, we are going to talk about it, but it's very outdated. I've developed much more consistent strategies while working on my Lunatic Plus Iron Man route, and trust me, if you watch that video, I make money. So if I'm telling you not to watch it, you know I'm serious. I'm hoping this video will serve as a more definitive guide moving forward, unless someone else refines the strategies even further. And if you do want to watch a full clear of this chapter, I recommend instead checking out the Lunatic Plus Iron Man playthrough on my channel. In that playlist, you're going to see me using the newer and more consistent Chapter 5 strategies, and even see the process that I went through to help me develop and discover it. Now, having said all of that, the opener is the most important point for this map. You have pressure coming from the top, not just in how to rescue Ricken and Maribelle, but also the fact that there's a line of melee enemies who are backed up by 1 to 2 range magical attackers, and it's the same on the left. You have a set of physical attackers backed up by a dark mage. All of these enemies are hostile, and they will begin moving on turn 1. This presents a very complicated and difficult problem to solve. You need to stop the enemies on top in such a way that you're able to clear threats who deal high physical damage and usually require a lot of power to remove. But then you also need to be ready to counter attacks at 1 to 2 range while also being able to stoke high magical damage. Honestly, finding 2 characters capable of doing this together with the right formation to bait the mage into attacking the right target is hard enough on its own, but it gets even worse from there. Because on the left, we have the exact same problem. Extremely powerful enemies with inflated stats, they can 1v1 almost any character in your army, but there's 4 of them, and they're mixed attacking, with melee attacking at range, with physical attacks, with magical attacks. Even if you had 1 character who could handle all of this, you also would need them to be in 2 places at the same time. And even if you have 2 characters who are capable of doing this, they also need to clear the enemies so fast that they don't spill over into your back line and start cutting down your support units. And even if you meet all of those conditions, here come the Wyverns. And this map is perfectly designed to screw over the player with terrain in a way that almost no other Fire Emblem map has ever been designed. The enemies have flying units who can race over these cliffs, cover almost the entire very small map, leaving no safe places to stand. But since you can't go up these cliffs and you're incapable of removing these flying threats, you either need to hope for the Wyverns to fly to very specific positions on the map that leave them vulnerable, or at least minimizes their attack range. However, there's another solution, and it becomes the foundation for our strategy. If you understand how to manipulate the enemy formation, you can try to bait them into moving and attacking in specific ways that you can control. And once you understand that this is essential to clearing the map, then you can start to form a working strategy. If you can't control these Wyverns, then nothing else before that is going to matter. So as a result, let's start thinking there. How are we going to deal with these Wyverns, and hopefully with the other enemies and their reinforcements? I'm going to cover 3 different openers in this video. The best one for you is going to depend on a few factors like the strength of your team, which units you're actually using, and whatever playstyle is most comfortable for you. Anyway, let's talk about the first opener. This is a very reset-heavy opener, and it's the one that I used in the past until I finally decided to develop a more consistent one. The idea is to try and gain as much momentum as possible on turn 1 with some combination of either landing crits or landing dual strikes. Remove the enemies who are threatening that will otherwise be impossible to remove, and then leave behind a select few enemies that you can safely enemy phase before the Wyverns reach you. The strategy of using front-loaded risk worked really well for us in the past, and you might need to reset a few times to get the perfect luck, but once you've got it, it makes turn 2 and turn 3 much easier to manage. But this opening really illustrates the difference between Lunatic and Lunatic Plus style play. You see, I really believe that anyone who could beat this chapter in Lunatic can absolutely beat the rest of the game. You are never going to encounter another challenge as difficult as finding an opener for Chapter 5 on Lunatic mode. However, it's not the same on Lunatic Plus. On L+, Chapter 6 is arguably even harder and comes immediately after. Chapter 7 can be tough. Chapter 9 is brutal. Chapter 10 and 11 are not particularly easy. Chapter 12 might actually be the biggest roadblock in Lunatic Plus, and even after Chapter 12, you're not out of the woods. Even Chapters 13 and 14 are reasonably difficult. The Mila tree is easy enough if you know what you're doing, but if you don't know the strategy, it's hard enough that some people have quit a playthrough more than halfway through the game because the Mila tree is so frustrating and feels impossible. Walhart is basically an endgame boss who just decided he wanted to appear halfway through the game on a kill boss map, and it's almost impossible to route, and you need to find a way to low turn boss kill him with your mid-game units that you have available at this time. Yen Fei is basically the same thing, except the game forces you to fight your way through an imposing army in order to reach him against a superior air force with ground tiles that are being crumbled and destroyed under your own feet. And the endgame chapters are filled with capped enemies who have skills like Aegis, Pavis, Luna, and Counter. The difficulty in Lunatic Plus never lets off, even once you have access to powerful tools like Gale Force and Infinite Rescue Staves. Arguably, you need those tools to even be able to get through late-game Lunatic. And the elements that make this game mode more difficult also apply just as much, if not even more, in these early chapters. Okay, so the strategy I'm about to describe, it works reasonably well on Lunatic mode. That's where I learned it, and I took it from there, and I adapted it as best as I possibly could for Lunatic Plus. The problem is that, as we just discussed, Lunatic Plus is not the same beast. So let's talk about this opener. First of all, if you have Lonku and Sully paired together, you can use them to instantly remove the enemy Dark Mage. However, this requires some combination of a C support from Sully, Lonku getting a decent strength level up, using strength tonics, forging the killing edge, and you definitely need to land that crit to make this possible. So big deal. With Lonku, a crit's going to happen like 25 or even 35% of the time. I'll just reset 4 times and then I'll beat the map. Well, no. This only puts Lonku in a position where he only needs to fight against melee enemies on enemy phase, and this is great. It allows one unit to completely lock down the left-hand side, which is one of the things that we're looking for. However, on that enemy phase, Lonku needs to dodge at least 2 attacks. If he gets hit by the Myrmidon, it's not a big deal. and he's more likely to dodge the axe fighters, but still adding a 1 in 4 crit chance and then narrowing it down even further with required evasion from Lon'qu to survive, well, you're looking more like 20 or 30 resets before you even get through turn 1. But the good thing is, he can land a crit on the melee attackers on enemy phase and instantly remove them, and that reduces the number of threats you have to remove on turn 2 even further, and that would be great. But all of this only works on Lunatic mode, because you see Lunatic Plus is going to introduce Luna Plus, Hawkeye, Counter, and Pavis Plus, and all of these things mess with Lon'qu's strategy. If any of these enemies roll Luna Plus, they might force you into a situation where Lon'qu needs to dodge every attack instead of only needing to dodge 2 attacks. If they have Counter, Lon'qu might be required to crit them in order to avoid destroying himself with counter damage, or it might even be impossible for him to fight them. If they have Hawkeye, he can't even dodge. If the Dark Mage has Pavis Plus, Lon'qu can't get rid of him. If he has Vantage Plus, Lon'qu has to dodge his attack too. And if the other enemies have Pavis Plus, then on the next turn, even if Lon'qu survived, you're going to have too many enemies left over with too much HP, and you can't even clear them out. This puts us into a situation where we mostly want to see enemies who have exactly Aegis Plus and Pass on the left-hand side, or a very specific combination of the other skills, and our odds have massively, and I mean massively, gone down. You'd probably have to reset like 100 times to get the Lon'qu opener to work on the left side, maybe even hundreds of times, especially because you have to avoid not even just bad luck, but mistakes or resets on the right-hand side, and you're also hoping that after you get through this, the Wyverns are actually going to behave in a few turns when they finally fly down. I don't like using this strategy anymore for this reason, but I will briefly discuss the rest of the opener just so you guys aren't left hanging. I think we have evolved past using this strategy, but for the sake of completion, I will mention how it works. Okay, so by pairing Vake up with Frederick, he can one-shot this Myrmidon up here with the Silver Lance. Make sure he doesn't have Pavis Plus, obviously. After that, Virion takes Vake from Frederick, trade a bronze or iron sword or the Orson hatchet into Frederick's hands, and then Virion uses Vake's strength bonus while shooting at the Barbarian. If you're lucky, you can even get a dual strike from Vake to deal even more damage. If the Barbarian's health is low enough, Ricken can pair up with Maribelle right over there and finish him off. If you finish him off, you technically don't need to use a rescue staff. You can even pass Maribelle over to Frederick in order to give Ricken a chance to bait in a dual strike from Frederick if you want to go for an even more luck-based strategy. If you absolutely need to remove him at all costs, you could even have Sumia fly up here and attack him at 1 range, or 2 range with the Javelin, and you could try to bait in dual strikes from Frederick. On the other hand, if you don't want to commit all of these resources just to removing the Barbarian, or if he survives anyway, then just use the rescue staff and pull Ricken back to safety at the bottom of the map. It's not a big deal, it's just 1 rescue charge. If Lisa doesn't have enough magic, you can send Miriel into this battle just to pair her up and give her a boost to her magic stat. The increased magic from pair up does increase your rescue staff range. Now this forces a situation where the Barbarian can only attack Frederick, and the Dark Mage seems to really prefer running up and attacking Virion like 95% of the time. The other 5% of the time, the incomprehensible part of Awakening's AI takes over, and he might do something different, but this is a reset-heavy strategy anyway, so if you get another reset in there, then you just take it. If you get all of this to go right on the left side and on the right side, congratulations, you made it past the first turn. Now this is a map that is extremely hard and you're not done yet. In order to stabilize the next few turns and form a defensive strategy, what I like to do is have Frederick run onto the fort, kill the Dark Mage with a Silver Lance, then when Sumia pairs up with him, she can either remove all of his gear so he doesn't take counter damage, or if there are no enemies with counter, you could trade something like the Bronze Sword into his hands and then pair up with him to increase his evasion and allow him to double enemies. You can allow the enemies to cluster around Frederick on this fort, while your other units on the bottom of the map slowly pull the enemies off of Frederick one at a time, and from this position you can usually win. If you still have the elixir, you can use that to keep Frederick alive, otherwise vulneraries are going to have to do. Also, you should absolutely give him a defense tonic before going into this chapter. He's going to get hit a bunch of times, and every time he gets hit, a defense tonic is like 2 preemptive points of healing. As a general rule, if a character gets attacked more than 5 times in a battle, a defense tonic is both cheaper and more effective than a vulnerary. Isn't that crazy? So unless your primary tanks are already taking minimal, like 0 chip damage, they should always get a defense tonic before pretty much every battle, although it is expensive, so think about it. The problem with this strategy is I had no reliable way to control the Wyverns, and it was extremely unsatisfying to reset 20 or 30 times to get a good attempt going, and then have it fail apart if one of the Wyverns chose to move into the most annoying spot on the map, which I swear they just start doing more and more often the more tilted you get. So aside from the lack of reliability, I'm going to mention one of the positive aspects of using this strategy. Most importantly, especially if you're playing on Lunatic, this strategy can be used with very minimal investment. If you made it to Chapter 5 and you're struggling and your team doesn't feel very strong, just add Lon'qu and Sully to the team, and you can use this opener where they run to the left and kill the Dark Mage. You can use Vake and Virion to help Frederick with chipping down the guys in the center, and all of this works pretty much at base with those characters. And this still leaves Robin and Chrom alive to throw out an extra attack if you need. At worst, you might need to forge some extra might onto the killing edge so that Lon'qu is dealing enough damage with his crit to guarantee a kill, and even that isn't bad. The killing edge is one of the best weapons you're going to get for a long time, and the best thing about forging weapons is that they're not a committed resource. Even if you forged it here to guarantee this kill for Lon'qu, you can still give the sword to Chrom or Robin or anyone else, or even just give it to Lon'qu in the coming chapters. It's very flexible in that way. With that, I'd like to talk about the more consistent openers that are designed to minimize the impact of these Wyverns by either completely controlling their movement or stopping them from being able to attack your back line. So for our second opener, let's discuss the corner turtling strategy. I did not come up with this one. It was invented about 9 years ago, and honestly, it can still be relevant today. Even if you aren't going to use this strategy, which I don't normally use it, it's still very useful to know about it because it teaches you a lot about how to build a solid defensive platform and helps you understand how and why enemies choose to target specific characters and how to use that to your advantage. Now, I became familiar with this strategy when I was watching Kuroi TTV's Resetless Lunatic Plus No Death Clear. However, I believe the strategy even predates that. A user named Interceptor made a series of posts on Surin's Forest way back in 2013, and while some of those strategies do seem a little bit crude by modern standards, a lot of them are still used to this day in Lunatic Plus. I don't think I really use any of the original Interceptor strategies anymore, at least not one for one, but I do think it's important to give a good source for this information because they absolutely served as a foundation for some of my ideas that I built my strategies on top of. And if you want to look at those threads, they do still exist to this day, so you can still read them and you can still get that information and absorb those ideas. Now, if I'm wrong about any of my sourcing, if someone else came up with the idea first, you can correct me in the comments. This video, it's already long enough, and I already go on enough tangents. I didn't really want to spend hours researching who came up with what strategy first, but I did at least put some effort into giving proper credit where it's due, because again, I think that's important. I also wouldn't like the idea of someone stealing my ideas and just claiming that they came up with them without giving any credit at all. Okay, before I keep going off on another tangent, the way this corner strategy works is like this. First, you need to clear some of the difficult enemies near the starting positions, especially the 1 to 2 range attackers if you can, so they don't cause problems later. This is going to be relatively easy to do because your Robin is going to be jacked. Getting rid of mages helps a lot because you can set up a situation where no enemies with 2 range attacks can reach your party, and that's going to help a lot. Next, you retreat to the bottom right corner. Our goal is to cluster all of the enemies around Frederick and Robin, making it impossible to hit anyone who is behind them. You want to have 5 units standing in the forward position on the field, and each of them is going to have a para partner. Frederick is on the bottom left in the forward position. He's going to have a Kellum pair-up to minimize the incoming damage. Frederick should not have any weapons equipped. This is going to prevent him from taking counter damage. Robin is on the corner position, 1 space up and 1 space to the right of Frederick. The cliff side above Robin prevents attacks from enemies in that direction, at least on foot. and this makes it so that only one enemy can approach Robin at a time on foot. If Robin's defense is good enough, they can survive in this position. A Chrom pair-up can increase their chance to dodge attacks. Again, we want no weapons equipped. We need to prevent dealing counter damage to ourselves. In between Robin and Frederick, you're going to have Lisa. Because she was able to gain stats and levels thanks to using her staff a lot in the previous chapters, Lisa can hold this position fairly well. The melee enemies can't reach her, the flyers can't reach her, and because she's boxed in between Robin, Fred, and the edge of the map, some of the 2-range attackers might be able to hit her from 2 range. They're not going to do it because they don't see lethal. Because of her high resistance stat, the mages can't do it, and she'll have enough speed and HP that the axe fighters can't one-shot her. She's a lot less of an appealing target, and because of a quirk in the order of how the enemies move, the 2-range attackers often get stuck behind the 1-range attackers anyway. Behind Lisa, we're going to have Maribelle. In the bottom right corner, nothing can reach her. We haven't had a chance to train her like we did with Lisa, so we need to keep her away from any action, and in this space, no enemies will ever be able to target her. Now you will notice there is a vulnerable gap in this formation, and it has to do with the cliffs that we mentioned earlier and the Wyverns. Now obviously with this setup, the cliffs are protecting Robin and Maribelle. However, the Wyverns could fly over the cliffs. Not only could they attack, but they're practically guaranteed to do it, and that's great. It means we have fully accounted for any movement of the Wyverns, and we have made sure we know exactly what they're going to do and where they're going to go. We can now create a plan that always works as long as the Wyverns always fly over these cliffs, which they are always going to do. So, for our final defensive position, we're going to use Vake with a Sumia pair-up. These Wyverns are deadly, and they hit hard, but they don't have 2-range attacks, and they can't fly past our army because we've bunched everyone up together, so even characters with past can't get behind us. This is the foundation of any corner turtling strategy. You use the corner to prevent enemies with past from getting behind you. With a speed pair-up, like Chrom or Sumia, Vake has enough speed that the Wyvern cannot double him even at base, and because he can only be targeted by one Wyvern, and it can't double him, he only needs to survive 1 attack. With his naturally good bulk, high HP, and HP plus 5, he can always survive 1 hit at base, even if the enemies roll Luna Plus. Of course, we want to make sure Vake has nothing equipped. This will prevent him from taking any counter damage. Again, this is the key to this strategy. Now, the Wyverns are guaranteed to move into these tiles, while the other enemies are guaranteed to cluster together on the left. Every turn, Maribelle can heal Vake back to full HP with the help of a Vulnerary if needed. Lisa can heal Robin or Frederick back up with the use of Vulneraries and other healing items. You can keep all of your frontline fighters alive, and this creates a situation where the enemies cannot break through our defense. I'll also mention that if you need Frederick to have more speed, you can have Sumia pair up with Frederick, and Chrom pair up with Vake instead. This makes it so that Chrom is still standing next to Robin, and Robin can still access the convoy, while Chrom provides the speed bonus needed to prevent Vake from being doubled. Now I will say right away, the biggest downside of this strategy is that it does not work as a one-size-fits-all solution. It requires a bit of setup, and most notably, your Robin and your Frederick both need to be strong enough to hold the most important defensive positions. Unlike Vake, they can't hold their positions at base. Frederick isn't a huge problem, but Robin is something that you need to plan for. You need to meta strategize around this. You need to build for this. This is the kind of strategy where if you want to use it, or even have it available as a fallback, you need to decide that at the beginning of the run, and build your Robin accordingly. If your Robin's not fast enough, or if your Robin is not bulky enough to hold this corner position, the strategy will instantly fail. So this strategy can't be used for every team and for every playthrough, not in the same way that my Lonku Sully strategy could be used by anyone as long as they get lucky. In fact, I'm going to be completely honest, it took me about an hour of practice to get this strategy to work properly while I was recording footage. Maybe the other higher level players can do it more consistently, but most of the time when I attempted this, it usually ended whenever a 2-range enemy could see lethal on either Vake or Frederick. Then they would run over, attack them, and that would end my attempt. I did get it to work more consistently by the end of my recording session, and I think I could replicate that now that I've learned to do it, but I'm not 100% confident in my own skills here. You typically also need to use 2 rescue staff charges for the corner strategy in order to help get Frederick or Robin back into position safely and quickly. Personally, I prefer saving as many rescue staff charges for Chapter 12 as possible, so that's another downside of this strategy for me. I'm usually aiming to beat this chapter by only using 1 rescue staff, and sometimes, if I'm okay with resetting, I could even clear this chapter with 0 rescue stabs. However, on the subject of luck, the counterpoint to any of the downsides of this strategy is that, of course, the long queue strategy requires way too much luck to work, while the Robin strategy, if you learn to do it consistently, will always guarantee results, so it does not require luck. You're going to need to practice. It might take you an hour, it might even take you more to master it reliably, or maybe you could get it to work faster than I did. And I don't know for certain that I'm capable of doing this strategy with 100% consistency, but there are high-level players who have shown the ability to use it in high-risk settings, so we know it is proven that this strategy can be consistent if you put in the work. It was classically used to beat Lunatic Plus resetless before it was even called Lunatic Plus Iron Man. So it absolutely works when it comes to consistency and has worked for 9 years. As long as you're willing to learn the strat, you have to go all in on Robin, you have to make sure they're ready for this chapter. It's obvious why some people would prefer this strategy over the standard reset for a crit opener, especially when that opener is even less reliable on Lunatic Plus. Now, funny enough, even outside of Iron Man, I think this strategy has a lot of value for one reason, and it's not something that I ever saw mentioned in the original post or observed by anyone else after that. This formation is fantastic if you want to train other units besides Frederick and Robin. Yes, ironically, hyper-training Robin early on actually opens up a strategy that you can use to train pretty much anyone else for free in Chapter 5. Fundamentally, this strategy is very similar to having Robin and Frederick low-man the chapter, steamrolling over weak enemies, and not needing to worry about guarding the back line because you have no back line in low-man. But the difference is that here, you field an entire party of units, and you use a key defensive formation to keep everyone 100% safe for theoretically an infinite number of turns, as long as you don't run out of healing anyway. In that situation, instead of having Robin kill the enemies, you can just have Robin continue to hold the line while someone else kills the enemies. Now, having said all of this, some of you are probably thinking, sure, we can survive forever in this position, but if we're not allowed to equip any weapons, how can we ever kill anything? How can we resolve this battle before we run out of healing? Well, here's the fun part. We get to use one of my favorite strategies, trade manipulation, to attack enemies safely on player phase and then ensure that our hands are empty again during the enemy phase, so we don't take any counter damage ever. So how does the trade manipulation work? I'm going to give you 2 examples, but it can honestly be done in a variety of ways, so use your best judgment depending on which enemy you need to remove, which actions you have available, and which characters you're trying to train. Let's start by having Robin put all of their items into the convoy except for the tome that they're going to use to attack. Now pretend we want to get rid of this enemy right here, which we do. Robin attacks them safely, and we've set up a situation where they can attack without taking any counter damage. Then, after Robin's turn, Vake is going to attack. He's going to take away Robin's tome, use the trade command, and then the convoy command to put the item back into the convoy. On the next turn, Robin can take the item back out of the convoy and use it to attack again. Then you can just repeat it over and over again. If Vake is busy, you can have Lisa do it instead. Just make sure that you have her do it before she uses her healing staff, and don't forget to have her heal before you need her to trade. On the other hand, you can have Lisa take away items from Frederick's hands, allowing him to attack, and then take away the Silver Lance, or the Bronze Sword, or the Orson Hatchet. Be careful when you're taking away Frederick's items, don't send them back to the convoy. You have to keep them in Lisa's inventory so that Frederick can grab the weapons back from Lisa when he needs to. With this strategy, you can pass your weapons back and forth to deal damage and then empty your hands to avoid ever taking any reflected damage from counter. Also, even when you get into a situation where you can enemy phase and quickly clear the enemies safely, I recommend avoiding doing this, because all it does is open up tiles where the 2 range attackers can move in to attack Robin and Frederick. So you want to avoid this as much as possible by leaving the 1 range enemies clustered in front of you. Corner turtling strategies are seen by some people to be kind of degenerate or even just really boring, but for me personally, when I learned about this for the first time, I was amazed. It's essentially taking the game that I've been playing for like 15 years and completely recontextualizing the defensive aspect of the entire Fire Emblem series for me. This is a defensive formation that I had never seen before when I was playing any Fire Emblem from 1 to 12 in like 15 years, maybe even longer. It's kind of incredible. And even though I don't use the corner strategies a lot, especially not to this extent, knowing how to do it and how it works helps you understand and build other defensive techniques that you can use in other situations. You can do trade manipulation to protect one-tile choke points, or even just do it to pass items between your forward tank and your anchoring unit. I really think it's worth knowing how to do this, because you can understand enemy behavior, enemy targeting, and how to keep your units alive just by standing in the right position instead of needing to grind to a level where you no longer need to think. You can just win by holding the right item or not holding the right item, and use the trade command as one of the valuable tools in your kit as a strategist. I recommend dealing with the mages and the wyverns first, because they are among the few enemies that can attack the same character twice in a single turn, and that makes it harder to keep up your healing against the enemy pressure. Also, you might think that enemies with counter are a high priority, but for the most part, we can just ignore them because, honestly, the way we're doing this, we completely ignore counter damage anyway. Imagine an enemy with counter who deals 0 damage to Robin. You actually want to leave this enemy standing in front of Robin because then you never need to heal them. Now Robin is taking 0 damage per turn, and that's fantastic. The biggest problem is actually enemies who have Luna Plus. These enemies can chip through Frederick, Vake, and Robin's HP much faster than you're capable of healing, so you don't want these enemies standing in front of them, hitting them for an extra 10 damage per turn. In an ideal world, you want to make sure that there are no enemies in the cluster with Luna Plus. After that, it doesn't really matter. I guess enemies with Hawkeye are kind of dangerous because you can't dodge them. Typically, the Interceptor strategy has been used by focus training Robin early on, and then transitioning into continuing to feed Robin and use them for the rest of the game as a solo carry unit. Having said all of that, I noticed something here that nobody else really took advantage of. Once you have this formation set up, you don't need to feed all of the kills to Robin. Just look at Ricken standing here in the back. Let's think about Virion, who we could send into this chapter instead of someone else. You could maybe let Robin get some chip experience here, but then give the killing shots to Virion so he gets extra experience from killing higher level enemies. Or do the opposite, have Virion chip enemies just to get a tiny amount of extra free experience, and then Robin finishes them off. If Robin was going to one-round the enemy anyway, you're basically just trading bronze bow charges for free experience that would have otherwise been lost. As someone who is really starting to appreciate the value of Virion on Lunatic Plus, this is a strategy I became more interested in exploring, but I never really found a way to work it into my own higher level, especially Iron Man clears. Maybe it's due to my own lack of skill or something else that I missed, but I'm generally not going to use this strategy pretty much ever, but I do think that it's worth knowing, so I wanted to include it in this video. Now, I believe I developed a strategy that works more consistently for me and my playstyle, so let's talk about that one next. And I think this is the best strategy of any that exists right now, although obviously I'm biased because it's my strategy and it works best for me. This strategy is so consistent that I even started using it in my Lunatic Plus Iron Man route, and so far, I have never failed to pull it off successfully. Every single time that I've gotten to Chapter 5, I have beaten Chapter 5 using this strategy. And most importantly, it doesn't involve corner turtling, it doesn't involve any strategies that people would think are too slow or too boring. It honors the promise that I made with my very first How to Start Lunatic Plus guide video. I wanted to show people that you can play this game, you can play Lunatic Plus in the same way that you would play any other Fire Emblem game without needing to rely on degenerate or very slow strategies or relying on low man strategies. And I believe I developed a strategy that works for this. We're going to use a full team, although I usually leave one roster space empty because it has some advantages and some disadvantages. Either way, we're going to clear the map in a way that feels the way that people expect a Fire Emblem game to feel, even in spite of the Lunatic Plus shenanigans that the game is about to throw in our direction. This strategy, like the Interceptor Strategy, it does require your Robin to be pretty powerful. In our case, we want a very specific amount of speed and a very specific amount of magic. The speed is going to allow us to double enemies with a Chrom pair-up, and the magic is very, very important. It's so important that I started almost exclusively using plus magic Robin in all of my runs ever since I developed this strategy. Our Robin is going to be set up so that they can always one-shot the enemy Wyverns, so that if these Wyverns roll counter, we kill them with a single attack and don't take any counter damage. Additionally, if you can one-shot an enemy, you can also kill them when they roll Aegis Plus, because you deal 100% of their HP. If you cut that in half, it's 50%. If you hit them twice for 50% of their HP, this will guaranteed kill them. The only way this Robin loses to a Wyvern ever is under 3 very specific conditions. First, they must have counter. Second, they must have Aegis Plus. The combination of exactly counter and Aegis Plus makes it so that you will deal counter damage to yourself, which will end up being lethal if you have to fight them in one range. The third condition is that the battle must force a situation where Robin has to enemy phase these Wyverns. As long as you can kill them on player phase, then even if they roll counter and Aegis Plus, you can still just attack them at 2 range and it's completely safe. The exact amount of magic you need is going to vary because you can always forge extra might onto either a wind, a thunder, or a flux tome depending on what build you're running. You can also use Maribelle, Lisa, or Muriel's pair-up when you need to one-shot enemies. Although this can be clunky to do, it is an option if you're struggling to hit the magic benchmark. I've had attempts early on when I was first developing this strategy where I needed Robin to change partners in the middle of battle, switching between Chrom to fight enemies that I needed to double, and Maribelle for enemies that I needed to one-shot. But if your Robin's magic is high enough, you won't need to do this, and this never happened to me ever since I started using plus magic Robin. So either way, just remember it's better to get the magic stat as high as possible before going into this chapter, because it will ultimately save you money for not having to forge extra might onto the Wind Tome. To train Robin for this, I recommend trying to get as many levels into Tactician as possible, and then reclass into Dark Mage or Mage later, instead of doing it immediately right away at level 10. This is going to help ensure that Robin gains enough levels that they're likely to gain all of the magic and the speed that they need to be able to carry in Chapter 5, and it even makes Side Story 4 more consistent. If your speed is good enough and your experience gain starts to slow down in a significant way, don't hesitate to reclass right away. But just think about this situation. A level 16 Robin is gaining experience as a level 16 character. If it starts to slow down, you can reclass them. Their internal level becomes 7, and their displayed level becomes 1. 7 plus 1 equals 8. This means that you can have Robin start gaining experience more quickly again as a level 8 character by using the second seal, which is a lot faster. Now sure, in an ideal world, you'd allow Robin to gain 20 levels in Tactician and then 20 more levels in Mage. But if it gets to the point where level 16 or level 17 Robin is gaining levels too slowly, I think it's much better to reclass sooner and allow you to gain a lot of levels right now, very quickly, early on, rather than theoretically gaining a higher total number of levels later on. Because later on, you're going to be strong enough anyway, so it's not that important. I do think that reclassing immediately at level 10, which is something that I used to do very often, is actually a little bit of a pitfall. This does keep Robin's internal level as low as possible, but it's simply not worth giving up those extra 5 or 6 levels that you can squeeze out by staying in Tactician for a little while longer, and getting more speed, and getting more magic. And since Tactician is faster than Mage and Dark Mage, it makes those doubling thresholds even easier to hit in Chapter 4, Side Story 1, and Chapter 5. Now, I know we have already talked about these Wyverns at length, but please remember that the entire chapter revolves around them. You must develop a strategy to deal with these Wyverns, Otherwise, it will be impossible to clear this chapter with consistency. On Lunatic and Lunatic Plus, the Wyverns have 34 HP, and they only have 1 resistance. So if you're trying to one-shot these enemies, then you need to have at least 35 attack. This might seem like a tall order, but let's look at things a little bit more closely. We're going to be taking advantage of the effective damage of the Wind Tome. This is something I have praised in earlier videos, talking about how effective damage and crit damage, when you forge it, becomes 3 times as valuable as a normal weapon forge. And on top of that, the Wind Tome is very cheap to forge anyway. So a basic Wind Tome only has 1 might, and against a flyer, that's only 3 attack. That's not too impressive. But if we forge it to 2 might, suddenly we have 6 attack, and 3 might becomes 9 attack, and 4 might becomes 12 attack. If you can attack a Wyvern with a Wind Tome that deals 12 damage, suddenly Robin needs a lot less magic to be able to one-shot them. And if you can forge the Wind Tome to 5 might, you get an extra 15 attack. Speaking from experience, it's pretty easy for Robin to hit at least like 18 or 19 or even higher magic if you run that plus magic Robin and train them properly. You need to examine what your Robin looks like. You need to examine your budget. You need to plan accordingly and forge the weapon to guarantee these kills. But honestly, the benchmark to one-shot these Wyverns is not as steep as I really initially thought it was, and I think you might be surprised too. It's actually pretty generous, especially if you're running plus magic Robin. You might think of this as a Robin-centric strategy, but it's not the case. You don't need to go all in on Robin to meet these benchmarks, and in many of my testing runs, I was often able to raise 1 or 2 other characters alongside Robin and still easily meet the benchmarks for this strategy, giving a lot of free kills to characters like Virion, Sully, Sumia, Crom, and Frederick. If you look at the footage that I'm showing on screen right now, you're going to see that none of those characters are at base level, so I was still able to train my Robin and train all of those other characters. Your Frederick and Robin are still going to be strong enough to handle this chapter, but your bench is going to look a lot stronger than a purely Robin and Frederick focused early game. You can still make this work. The reason is because as Robin and Frederick's level increases, they're going to gain less experience anyway, so usually it's fine to give a portion of this reduced experience to other characters. Then, when Robin's experience gain starts to speed back up again, they're going to gain enough extra experience to make up for what they gave up earlier against low-level enemies that they didn't need to fight. It's a complicated, nuanced process of experience management and distribution, and I don't blame a lot of people for not intuitively understanding it, but I have often said, and I've even argued about it, that the best value of Veteran is not allowing Robin to get a massively inflated level. It's to allow you to feed experience to other characters, but Robin still manages to keep a high level even while you're training everyone else, because every combat that Robin does fight is worth more to them, and it keeps them ahead of the level curve anyway, even when you're training other characters on the side. For the subject of speed, let's keep the discussion more brief because it's a lot more straightforward. You only need 16 speed, and you can often get this with 11 speed and a Crom pair-up. It's very easy for Crom to give plus 5 speed to Robin. This speed benchmark is nowhere near as steep as you might be imagining, and in fact, the more I play the game, the less I like using plus speed Robin, because honestly, my Robin is always fast enough at every point in the game, no matter which asset and no matter which flaw that I pick. So having extra speed beyond what is needed to double just feels like a waste of base stats and growths. Really, I'm not going to argue about it. I'm not going to tell other people that their builds are wrong, but personally speaking, I think plus magic Robin is the best, and I think plus speed Robin is actually very overrated. Because again, Robin is always going to be fast enough anyway, so really, what is that extra speed doing for you? Now finally, I can't believe we're almost an hour into this video, but let's talk about how to use Robin effectively, how to get them into position to kill these Wyverns, and let's actually talk about the best strategy for consistently clearing Lunatic Plus Chapter 5 that I have personally developed up to this point. Frederick is going to start the battle by running over and attacking this Myrmidon with a silver lance in order to remove him. Then you have Sully run over, trade a javelin or an Orson's hatchet into Frederick's hands, and then pair up with him. Now in order for this to work, Frederick needs to get a pretty high amount of strength. On a typical run, I needed to give Frederick a strength tonic as well as the energy drop from the first 6 renown rewards to give Frederick enough damage for this kill. A few times when I got really lucky and Frederick was very strength blessed, I could do it with just a strength tonic and without needing to use the energy drop. I don't think I ever got a run where the +4 damage from the energy drop and the strength tonic combined was not enough. If that somehow happens, maybe you just forge an extra point of might onto the Silver Lance, but honestly, I wouldn't worry about it because I think that's very unlikely, and it might even be impossible if you look at Frederick's base strength. I'm not even going to check. Like I said, it's never happened to me. I'm pretty sure it's impossible, but it might just be extremely rare. We needed Frederick to be unpaired. That way, Sully can run over and use a trade manipulation. She'll put the Orson Hatchet or the Javelin into his hands, and then pair up with him. This will allow him to enemy phase against the Dark Mage. Robin moves over and attacks whichever of the two barbarians that you do not want to enemy phase. Typically, it's going to be the one that has either counter or Luna. If neither one of them looks particularly dangerous, then just attack the one up top, but it doesn't really matter. This sets up a situation where you only have two enemies on the left to worry about. The barbarian will attack Robin, who is then going to counterattack them and pick up this kill. Then the Dark Mage will attack Frederick, because Frederick has lower resistance. If both barbarians have counter, or if the Myrmidon has Pavis, you probably just want to reset. Don't waste your time. It's going to require crits or dodges or luck to get through this. It's very difficult to win when you get this exact skill configuration, but it doesn't require nearly as much resetting as the Lonku opener, because you're just trying to avoid like one or two very specific skills instead of needing like a very specific configuration of 20 different skills on top of evasion and crits. With the enemies on the left cleared out, here comes the fun part. We're actually going to use all of our remaining team members to slowly chip away at the formation at the top over the next few turns with some help from Frederick. First, check Lisa's rescue staff range. It should be half of her magic stat if you don't know. If she's capable of targeting this square right here, you should have Ricken pair up with Maribelle right over here and then attack the barb. Getting some extra damage onto him before next turn is going to be helpful because it will be easier to get rid of him next turn. Damaging the Myrmidon is less important because Frederick can just one-shot him next turn anyway, so having Ricken damage him before that doesn't really help you. But if for some reason Frederick is unable to one-shot him, like if he rolled Pavis, you can have Ricken weaken the Myrmidon instead. Look, just use your best judgment. It's really good to be flexible with these strategies. Next, we're going to rescue Ricken to safety over here. Now with my remaining infantry unit actions, I'm going to unpair as many characters as I can. As a priority, you want them standing to the left if possible, but this can be difficult to do with the enemies covering so much territory. Still, just do your best. We want them unpaired so we can get as many attacks next turn as possible. Last, you're going to have Sumia fly over here. There's a really funny square right here where she can safely float around with the Javelin equipped. The enemy Dark Mage is going to attack her, and then she's going to hit back for some chip damage. You can even unequip her if you want to save Javelin charges, if you're being extremely stingy. More importantly, this keeps Sumia safe, but forces the Dark Mage to move into a very specific space, and that's going to be helpful for us on the next turn. On turn 2, we're going to start by moving the group on the right. First, have Frederick run back over and kill the Myrmidon with his Silver Lance. This also puts Sully into a position where someone else can grab her and either use her pair-up or have her attack later on against the Barbarian if we need to. You see all of these characters we unpaired last turn? Their goal is to use the combined power of Ricken, Miriel, Virion, Vake, or whichever other scrubs that you brought with you to bring down this one Barbarian. He might be ridiculously bulky, but if you throw enough weaklings at him, they can eventually bring him down. A trained Miriel, Vake, or Virion makes this even easier, but you can really use whichever units you want. Remember that if you run out of attacks, you can still have someone grab Sully and then attack the Barbarian at one range with her to secure the final hit. In fact, you want to grab Sully anyway and drop her either way, because we need Frederick to be unpaired. In the best case scenario, you will be able to clear all of these enemies without needing Robin's action. We would strongly prefer Robin to go somewhere else this turn. For the last thing on the right, have Sumia fly back over. She can trade the Orson Hatchet or the Javelin into Frederick's active inventory slot. Usually the Javelin is enough damage here. You're going to notice that we moved the Dark Mage into a position where he can just barely target Frederick and cannot target anyone else with the moves that we've made. If Frederick needs plus speed to double the mage, you can have Sumia pair up with him. If not, you could also choose to leave them unpaired so that Frederick can pair up with Sumia and fly away next turn, although he rarely needs to, so it doesn't really matter. A bit of resistance and evasion is kind of nice. Pairing them or not pairing them is fine, so just do whatever you prefer. And finally, we'll move on to Robin's action for this turn. This is the moment in the video where I'm going to point out one of those really important tiles on the map that can be very easily overlooked, but can fundamentally change how you play through a chapter. Right here, there is a space just below the cliff where the movement and the attack range of the nearest wyvern can just barely reach a spot where you can stand. Now, because we have Robin who can always safely one-round almost any wyvern opponent, we can move Robin into this tile. If Robin removes this wyvern on enemy phase, you no longer need to worry about random movement and flying. You can always guarantee that you're going to draw him into this exact spot, and in fact, you're going to get rid of him right away. This is the first important step and the foundation for this strategy, which helps with making it so much more consistent and reliable than my older strats. And I don't really believe there exists a perfect set of moves that always wins on Lunatic Plus in just about any chapter, due to the random nature of the game mode. However, what I do believe is that if you learn the mechanics well enough, familiarize yourself with all of the important tiles and the important tactics that work on each map, you can increase your consistency to a limit that slowly approaches 100%. We got through the first 2 turns, but the battle's not over yet. And this is one of the few battles in the game with constant pressure all the way through to turn 5 or even turn 6. So let's proceed. On the next turn, the enemies on the right are going to start moving down this path in the middle of the mountain. Now there is something very interesting here which we can use to our advantage, and it has to do with the anchoring strategy that I've mentioned in the past. And one other thing, the enemies do not know which Lunatic Plus skills they have rolled. This is extremely significant information that you must always remember and use to your advantage. This wyvern is potentially very dangerous to Frederick. If he gets counter, he could easily just erase Frederick from existence. With Luna Plus, he could deal enough damage to potentially set up a lethal strike against Frederick too. But he doesn't know that. He's always going to prefer to attack Robin because he thinks he can deal more damage to Robin no matter what. As a result, we can use Frederick as a buffer to block the incoming infantry units from reaching Robin, and then you keep Robin behind Frederick. The Wyvern will fly at Robin, who we know can always defeat the Wyvern in a 1v1, and then the other enemies will fight Frederick. You can leave him within range of whichever exact number of enemies on the right he can safely battle, just by checking their skills. In the best case scenario, Frederick could fight almost all of these enemies in a single turn, but it typically relies on exactly what skills they have, and this is Lunatic Plus, so you're probably not going to get that lucky. But if the enemies are too dangerous, you can just have Frederick back up a few more tiles so that he's only in range of the enemies he can fight safely, while still protecting Robin, and Robin is still in range of the Wyvern to pull the Wyvern off of Frederick. This is a perfect example of anchoring, and because we're relying on the enemy's inability to see their own Lunatic Plus skills, it almost always works. But the next problem is getting all of our other units out of range of the Wyvern, and this is why we tried our hardest to get everyone as far to the left as possible on the previous turn. Sometimes you're going to need to do some very complicated movement tech to get them all over here, but it should be possible. I've never had a situation where it was just completely impossible to get everyone over there. One really important thing that you can remember to do is pair up 2 characters, move them out of range of the Wyvern, drop one of them, and then you can have a third character run over and pair up with a character right outside of the Wyvern's movement range. This allows you to get 3 characters to safety pretty efficiently. On this turn, you have to block the fort on the bottom left, so make sure you drop someone on top of it to save 2 tiles of movement. The other problem you need to be aware of is that a fighter with a short axe is going to come out of the fort on the left side. If you're sure that Robin can survive an attack from the short axe and the Wyvern, you have to remember that the Barbarian could roll Luna and Hawkeye, but if Robin can survive both of those hits, even with Luna, then you can leave Robin in range of the Barbarian from the fort. This allows him to kill both the Wyvern and the Barb in a single action, which will make next turn even easier, but if you can't do it, it's fine. You can just have your scrub squad take care of the short axe guy on the next turn. On the next turn, we shouldn't have any more Wyverns left to deal with right now, just the enemy group at the bottom, which you hopefully reduced to just a few remaining members. Unfortunately, it's difficult for me to give you specific instructions on what to do with this group, because they're made up of a mix of enemies who have different attack patterns, movement patterns, and randomized skills. But if you've made it this far in the game and you've paid attention to the lessons from my previous guides, I feel very confident that you can defeat these enemies within the next 1 or maybe 2 turns, even if you got an extremely dangerous and unlucky cluster of skills. This is why I structure my guides in the way that I do. Instead of telling you exactly which moves to make on turn 1, 2, and 3 for each of the previous chapters, I've been explaining concepts like positioning, defensive walls, how to use trade manipulation, baiting enemies with these anchoring strategies. You can set up the enemies so that they're going to attack Robin, Frederick. You can even let Sully stand at the very edge, or Lonku, to get in on the fighting. If you understand the enemy AI the way that I've been outlining it in these guides, you should be able to make each enemy go directly into a specific character that you want them to fight. Seriously, try it yourself. You're going to be surprised at how well you can manipulate the enemies once you understand them. It just takes a little bit of confidence that what you're going to do is going to work, so that you don't hesitate to even try it. And if you mess up, that's fine too. It just means that you learn something about the enemy behavior that you can apply on your next attempt. The last big problem you need to deal with are the Wyvern reinforcements from the last group of reinforcements on turn 5. And this is the very last thing in this chapter that can reasonably lead to a game over on this map, so this is crucial information and I'm going to outline it as best as I possibly can. First of all, at the end of turn 5, you need a character standing on this fort here at the bottom left. Personally, I like to use Maribelle. If you have to deploy her earlier on in the map to boost Lisa's magic range, then she's already going to be here. But usually, if you're not going to use her for the rest of the run, then she's really great for having this position. You don't need to worry about her gaining experience, and leaving her on the fort allows us to block a Dark Mage who would otherwise very quickly become an absolute menace to the party. And lastly, just like I did with Donnell in the previous guide, if I end up needing to sacrifice someone, I can have Maribelle act as a decoy. This isn't something I love doing to her, but if your goal is to win and you aren't using Maribelle for the rest of your playthrough, you should do it. It's one of the best ways to maximize your odds of success. However, if you play this next section perfectly, you shouldn't need to sacrifice anyone. It is still good to have options, but if you're the type who doesn't want to let anyone die, don't worry. You don't need to sacrifice her. And if you're planning to use Maribelle, just put someone else on the fort and use them for the sacrifice role instead. Okay, next, if everything was perfect and went the way that we wanted, we could leave Robin here and have them clear out the Wyverns on enemy phase. That would solve so many problems, and unfortunately, it does not work at all. You see, there's going to be a Myrmidon who spawns from this fort, and he happens to reach the exact same tiles that the Wyverns can reach. And we have no idea if he's going to spawn with Counter or Luna Hawkeye, so unfortunately, we need to stay out of range of all 3 of these enemies. If you got a particularly nasty group of enemies on the right side early on, you might even need Robin just to run back over and help clear out like the last guy who's standing anyway. But still, it would have been really nice if you could set up an enemy phase sweep with Robin here, but I just wouldn't risk it normally. It's just not going to work on this chapter, on this specific turn, in this specific spot. Dying to a random enemy with Counter this far into a very difficult battle is not worth it. What we're going to do instead is move all of our characters as far to the right as we can and cluster everyone else around these bushes, except for Maribelle, who's standing on the fort. Try to unpair everyone else if possible. It will give you more options next turn. And make sure that someone like Lisa or Ricken is standing exactly 6 tiles away from Maribelle. This is going to allow her to move 5 tiles next turn, pair up with them, and then safely escape from the enemies if we don't want to sacrifice her. And very quickly, things have changed. At the start of the next turn, you have 3 huge problems barreling down at you from multiple angles of attack. It almost feels like we're back in Chapter 2. We need to clear these enemies as fast as possible. If the enemies get the worst combination of skills, it might be completely impossible to stay within their range safely. Before we discuss the slow clear that you have to use when that happens, I want to talk about the fast clear, which usually does work, and you always want to use the fast clear if you can. To make the fast clear work, what you need is to have Robin survive an attack from both Wyverns and fight them both without taking any counter damage. If these conditions are met, you're in really good luck. It's almost impossible to fail from here. And remember that you can switch your Crom pair-up for a defensive pair-up like Kellum or Sully or Stall if you need a little bit of extra defense and you have enough magic to guarantee the one-shot anyway. We're going to use another anchoring strategy here. You can have Frederick block the Myrmidons coming from the left. Standing right at the corner of this cliff tile works really well because it forces the Myrmidons to walk a very long way to go around Frederick wherever he's standing. However, if they have pass, you might not be able to block them and Robin needs to stand a little bit further away no matter what. If Frederick has the Silver Lance equipped, and the enemies don't have exactly Pavis counter, then he can kill or at least badly wound them both on enemy phase. If he can only fight one, then just have him back up a little bit, so he's only in range of 1. Frederick is going to fight the Myrmidons while hopefully blocking them, and Robin is going to stand outside of the Myrmidon range, but stand within the range of the Wyverns. This causes the Wyverns to attack Robin, which is good because it prevents all 4 attacks from piling onto Frederick, especially if the Wyverns have something like Counter or Luna Plus. Remember, they don't know that they have lethal even if they do technically have it, so we can guide them into Robin using this anchoring strategy. If Robin can only safely stand within range of 1 Wyvern, then you have him back up, and just make sure that Frederick can survive within range of either the 2 or 3 enemies that he's standing in range of. If you're able to clear or severely wound all 4 of these enemies, then on the following turn, you can move your units safely to the left to keep them out of range of the Wyvern on the right. You can even use their actions to help with cleaning up the wounded enemies if it comes to that. And once the other Wyvern flies down, you can pick him off pretty safely, and then you're in the home stretch. I truly believe this map is impossible to fail if you clear these last few Wyverns and get past this point. The boss and his group, they might seem dangerous, but picking them apart is very reliable and it's actually quite a lot of fun. It's a nice little puzzle to solve. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the slow problem for dealing with the turn 5 group. If the enemies were too dangerous, you might have needed to only fight 3 or 2, or let's say even 1 of them. If you get into that situation, what do you do about that? If that happens, you need to get very creative. It's usually possible to find a way through this, but it can sometimes be very difficult to spot the line. Also, depending on just how dangerous the enemies are, it might require that sacrifice we talked about. If you think you're going to need to sacrifice a unit in order to win, you need to identify that sooner rather than later. Have Muriel or your chosen sacrifice stand deep within range of the enemies and force one of them to move out of position in order to break away from the rest of the group. This will stagger their overlapping attack ranges for the next turn when you need that extra breathing room. If you don't do this preemptively, then the next turn you're going to be stuck in a situation where you still have to sacrifice someone, but you no longer get to choose who it is, because the dangerous flying enemies can see your entire group, you have nowhere left to run, and they can just pick and attack whoever they feel like attacking. It's much better to sacrifice a unit you don't care about right now, rather than losing a unit you do care about on the next turn. Putting all of that aside, let's take a look at what it looks like when you're able to fight the fewest number of enemies safely. It should always be an option to have Robin move up here onto the pass and stand just within range of 1 Wyvern. There should be a spot that only the forward Wyvern can reach, and in this location, Robin only needs to fight 1 enemy safely, which is almost always possible. If that exact guy rolls exactly Aegis counter, then I'm not sure. I'd probably honestly use a rescue staff to bail myself out. Like, have Robin run forward, or Frederick run forward, kill something really dangerous, and then rescue them back to safety. That might be the only way to get out of that situation, but I've never seen it happen, so it should be fine. Frederick can stand within range of 1 or both Myrmidons, and As long as he's only within range of one Wyvern that's attacking Robin, he should only have to fight the Myrmidons that you want him to fight. This strategy is slower and it's going to cause more problems next turn, but if you have to use it, if you're forced into this position, just try finding a way to safely clear 2 or even 3 enemies on enemy phase. It's not as good as clearing all 4, but it's better than nothing. And for the rest of your group, if you're using this formation, try to get everyone as far to the left as they could safely stand. This is going to allow them to run back out of the flying range of the Wyvern on the next turn and help you clean up the remaining enemies. You could also potentially have someone stand at the very edge of the enemy range to bait exactly 1 unit, as long as you know that character is going to be attacked instead of Robin. If this character can't deal enough counter damage to themselves, but they can survive a hit from the Wyvern, it's a great option for this character. In the example above where Robin couldn't fight them safely, you can even have this character pair up with Virion or Crom or Robin to try and bait in a super effective dual strike, or just have nothing equipped so that Wyvern goes after that character while the other Wyvern goes after Robin. Remember, you don't take counter damage from the dual strike or if you have no weapons equipped, so if you get lucky, you could heavily damage this Wyvern even if they have a very dangerous set of skills. On the following turn though, you're going to have a major problem on your hands. The last Wyvern on the right flies into the most annoying spot possible and seems to consistently do this every single time if you use the slow opener. If Robin was standing far enough up on the pass, you could have Robin wrap around over there to get rid of him, otherwise the ledge is blocking the way. It's great though because this opens up a lot of safe territory on the bottom right corner, and then your other characters can move to the right to be safe. However, it does leave Robin in range of the Barbarian at the top, so depending on Robin's bulk, your remaining HP, the enemy's skills, this one might be tricky to pull off. Additionally, if the flyers on the left side are still alive, you're going to need units like Virion, Robin, and Ricken to go over there and help get rid of them. In a lot of cases, as long as your slow opener wasn't too slow or too inefficient, it's going to end up looking the same as the fast one that we talked about at the start. It's just a little bit more hectic. You could have Robin and everyone else run to the left, get rid of these remaining enemies, stay out of range of the flyer, or at the very least, if Robin needs to stay in range of the last Wyvern on the right, just make sure he can survive that hit. But in the worst case, you might have to struggle. You might have to split up your forces like we talked about, Robin going up here, everyone else going down here. You might need someone else to deal with the remaining Wyverns, or even the Myrmidons at the bottom if you couldn't get rid of them. But then you also might need an extra character to body block for Robin so that the Barbarian can't reach them. It's possible to get out of these situations. Between the most lucky and the most unlucky enemy configuration in this last group of enemy, I find that I still have almost always beaten this map if I get this far. Well over 90% of the time, if I've made it this far. The only difference is how difficult it's going to be. How much do I need to think to find the winning line, and whether or not I need to break out the calculator and start doing Luna Plus, Aegis, Pavis, and counter calculations. This is actually a great example of something that I've talked about in the first video, with how Lunatic Plus and its random difficulty separates good, great, and top level players. So a good player might not be able to find the winning line here at all, and they think that I'm good at Fire Emblem, so this map must just be unfair. It must be impossible. But a top level player could always find that winning line, and they realize that there's always a way to win from this position. In this way, you're separating the good players from the great players. I encourage you to approach the game with this mentality. Don't make excuses. Don't blame the game for being unfair. Try to actually think of all of these different mechanics that you can use to your advantage, understanding of positioning, the enemy AI, and figure out the best way to win. And you're going to be surprised at how sometimes these seemingly impossible situations actually did have a correct solution. But it does require very high-level understanding of the game, and it requires you not to make any mistakes, because as soon as you make one mistake on Lunatic Plus, not only will you instantly be punished, but 5 turns later, it can also cause you to be punished in a way that you didn't even expect. And it can be extremely difficult, and it can be very stressful, but in my opinion, I think it is worth it in the end. And for those who have watched my streams, you know that even I still crash out sometimes, but I really love this game mode just for exactly what we're discussing right now. The way that it really, really tests your game mastery in a way that no other Fire Emblem experience has ever done. You can't win just by copying the LTC strategy that someone else developed. You have to know the game well enough to be able to win these battles by your own power. In any case, no matter which of those three strategies you used to get past this turn 5 group, no matter how you dealt with this final group, I can say one thing with confidence. If you made it past them, you have absolutely already beaten the map, you just don't know it yet. I have devised a series of moves that always wins from this position, no matter what. I've even used this in the past when I was consistently using a much weaker Robin build, and I needed to switch between a Maribelle or a Crom pair-up, depending on whether I needed speed or magic, and this strategy still works. With a stronger Robin, if you're following the benchmarks that I set up earlier to be able to one-shot the Wyverns, you can absolutely win with this strategy. But again, even a weaker Robin can do it, so you are going to be fine. Take a minute to relax, heal up your characters, set up for the final approach. There's no rush, we're not doing an LTC. You can use the fort for free healing, you can have Maribelle and Lisa use their staves if you want to get experience. I value experience over money, especially on my staff users. And by the way, 2 heal staves generate more experience than 1 mend staff, and it's cheaper, so always use heal twice instead of using mend once if you get the chance. Mend is usually only good if you immediately need a ton of healing right now, and it cannot wait. For the last set of enemies, we need to do a few things. First of all, take any characters that you are not going to use and move them to the bottom or the bottom left area of the map so that they are out of the way and they're not in any danger. Next up, let's talk about the characters that we are going to use. Some of these options can be changed around. They are very flexible. Like you could use Stall instead of Sully, or you could even use Kellum instead of Stall or Sully. I'm going to talk about the primary units and then the secondary units. In most cases, the secondary units could be replaced by anyone else as long as they can fulfill whatever that same role is. The primary units are going to be Frederick and Robin, and it pretty much has to be Frederick and Robin. And one last thing before I start, and this is very important. The enemies at the top with the boss have linked AI, and they will all become aggressive at the same time if you move into just one of their attack range. So do not get into position until you are ready to move all of your characters forward on the same turn. If you try to move Robin forward first and then Frederick forward later, you're going to get attacked before you're done setting up. On the left side, Robin is our primary. When you're ready, move them onto the fort, which is just within range of one enemy. Follow the same rules for fighting Wyverns that we've been using until now. If they don't have counter or Aegis, I like to use the Robin and Crom pair-up either way. This allows Robin to use a cheaper tome, kill the Wyvern with like 2 attacks from fire, and then it even gives Crom a chance to dual strike and get some free experience. Depending on which skills the enemy has, you might need to change Robin to a more powerful tome, or even a different para partner. If the enemy has exactly both Aegis and counter, don't be afraid. It's not as bad as it looks. Instead, we're going to have Crom stand in front with no weapons equipped. That way he will still bait the enemy, but Robin won't take any damage, and then Robin can attack the enemy at 2 range next turn and just be completely fine. If the damage numbers work out, you could even potentially have Crom hold a very weak weapon like a bronze sword with a Robin pair-up for potential dual strike damage, as long as he won't deal too much counter damage to himself. Break out the calculator if you need to. It is absolutely worth it if you can get Crom to do this. I'm not going to cover every single possibility. We've already talked about how to fight these Wyverns at extreme length, so let's just assume the most likely outcome. Robin fights and kills this Wyvern on enemy phase. On the right side, we're going to have Frederick as our primary. He's going to bait, and he can potentially even kill the 2 Wyverns on the right, depending on their skills. There is a little bit of flexibility on how Frederick is going to act, and it all comes down to how dangerous these enemies are. In most situations, you have Frederick move just to the edge of the range of the Wyvern, who is standing all the way to the right. If he doesn't have counter, make sure to equip something like the Iron Sword or the Iron Axe. A good pair-up partner for Frederick would be someone like Sully or Sumia if you're trying to build support with those characters. Or you can use someone like Kellum or Virion if you need defense and attack. Sully actually works great for that too. She's just a fantastic support. However, I do like to have Virion alone at the bottom of the map, and we're going to discuss that in a moment. Not with the scrub characters, but closer to Frederick. If the enemy doesn't have counter, this is great. You can have Frederick fight them. And if the enemy does have counter, this is also fine. You just have Frederick stand in his range with no weapon equipped, or if you calculate he can fight safely with just a bronze sword, just like we did with Crom, you can have him do that instead. Remember that if you kill the enemy on the second attack, you won't take any counter damage. As a result, you can often get into situations, especially with a defensive pair-up like Sully or Virion, where Frederick can take some damage from the Wyvern, hit him back, take a little bit of counter damage, he survives, and then if he kills the enemy with the second hit using either an Iron Sword, an Iron Axe, or a Bronze Sword, if he can do that, go ahead and do it, because he won't take any damage when he kills the enemy. At the bottom, we're going to leave Virion, Lisa, and Ricken. They are not with the scrub squads at the bottom left. They are closer to Frederick. Frederick needs to be able to run back and join this group later if he needs help clearing out the Wyverns on the right, or if you just need some free healing. Don't have them go up the pass, but have them stay near the pass. These are what I consider the secondary units, so you can replace them with your favorite Wyvern killers and your favorite healers. For example, normally I send Maribelle over to the left so she can support the Robin and Crom team, but you could easily have Lisa on the left and keep Maribelle on the right. Or if you don't like using Ricken, you can keep Muriel here near the pass to use the Elwind Tome. Either way, on the next turn, the enemies always move in a very interesting but very deliberate way that allows for the following actions. On the next turn, the enemies will always move in the same way, and it allows for some very interesting strategies to be pulled off. If Robin is injured, you can have Maribelle or Lisa heal him. As long as he's standing here next to the fort, she's going to be completely safe. Robin is going to move forward and attack the Wyvern that's flying over the cliffside. This removes his attack and prevents him from taking out Maribelle. Additionally, it leaves Robin in range of the boss, and this is another one of those keys to our strategy. If Robin is within range of the boss, then the boss must attack Robin, and this prevents him from flying away and pinning Frederick into the corner on the next turn. We don't want that, so we have to get rid of him this turn. Also, the boss is holding a weapon that seems dangerous, but actually works to our advantage. You see, he has a 1-2 range attack. If you're thinking with normal logic, this would make him a tricky opponent to deal with. He has a massive flying range, and he can attack 2 tiles away. It would be almost impossible to keep any of your units safe if they get within his range. However, we're not thinking like normal people. We're thinking in Lunatic Plus terms. Holding this weapon ensures that the boss will always attack from 2 range. That means that even if he rolls counter, it won't matter because he's always going to attack us from 2 tiles away. And if we leave it so that Robin is the only character within his range, that's even better. We can get rid of him before he gets close enough to threaten the rest of our army. We've actually turned his 1-2 range weapon into a liability. On the right side, make sure to keep Frederick out of the boss range for exactly the same reason. You don't want the boss going right instead of going left. Now, if Frederick can fight the Wyverns safely on the right by himself, have him do it, just get rid of them and save yourself some stress. But if he can't, have him retreat to the pass. Lisa can stand behind him and heal him if she needs to, but make sure that a unit is standing 6 tiles away from Lisa. That way, on the following turn, she can move 5 tiles and then pair up with that character in order to escape. Unlike Frederick, she doesn't have enough movement to get away from the Wyverns on her own. During this enemy phase, the boss gets removed by Robin, and then you only need to worry about the last 2 Wyverns, if they're even still alive at this point. I'm not going to detail how easy it would be to have Robin run over to the right side and assist Frederick, because that's obvious. In fact, from here, there's about 100 different ways you could win. However, I will discuss the worst case scenario, especially since I was lucky or unlucky enough to get that on my last attempt when I was recording footage. I needed Frederick to retreat all the way down here to the fort, and these units were isolated very far away from Robin because the Wyvern in front had exactly Luna plus and counter. However, with this formation, you can do something. You can have Robin stand in range of the top Wyvern, pulling them back away from Frederick and the rest of the group while you're splitting the enemies up, and that leaves only one Wyvern going after the bottom team, the very dangerous, the very annoying one. On the next turn, the bottom team can work together to kill this Wyvern. With the firepower of Virion, Ricken, Maribelle, you could easily do it. I didn't even need to use Frederick when I was recording this footage. Do not underestimate Virion and Ricken. Ricken is slow, but if you keep him near the back line, you basically have a tactical 2-range artillery that you can send forward and fire at any time to deal high chip damage or potentially remove an enemy outright, as long as you're always paying attention to where he's standing and you know how to keep him safe. I've had playthroughs where I was only fielding Ricken just to take up the last space in my roster because I didn't have anyone else that I was using, and in that time, he still reached level 10 before I got to chapter 12, because of how many times I found situations where he could always run forward and attack safely. As for Virion, I'm probably going to make an entire video about how strong he is in the future, but I'm starting to believe he is one of the better units in the game, especially if we're limiting the discussion to Generation 1. I know in my Chapter 2 guide I mentioned that I had trouble getting him to work, but since then I have really developed my Virion strategies. If you watched a lot of my other content, you've probably heard me singing the praises of Archer Crom and especially Sniper Crom in the past. Virion has basically all or almost all of the same advantages of Archer Crom, and he has none of the downsides. He doesn't require a second seal to get going, and he never needs to train with using a bronze bow. He starts with D rank in bows when you get him. In a game that has almost no characters in a default using bow or archer class, a game where archers have some of the strongest utility they have ever had in any Fire Emblem, it's actually sort of amazing that Virion gets so overlooked when he's the only character who can do this. As for Maribelle, if you're like me, you should probably have her run around the map healing everyone to get even more free staff experience. Lisa has already gotten more than enough at this point, and we don't want her reaching level 20 too soon. Getting Maribelle to catch up is going to be more useful if you're planning to use both of them, but if not, that's fine. However, I do consider Maribelle to be one of the strongest marriage options for male Robin, so keep that in mind. While Saria and Robin allows Robin to go into any class line and still get the benefits of a partner with Hex and Anathema, Maribelle does something that's a bit of the opposite, but in a good way. She synergizes with the fact that Robin already wants to go into Dark Mage anyway, so you're avoiding the skill redundancy by having Saria and Robin both bringing Hex and Anathema, which doesn't stack. The Troubadour and Valkyrie pair-up instead gives speed, magic, resistance. It's the closest thing we have to a Paladin pair-up for magical units, and on top of the power of Robin's Hex and Anathema, instead of redundancy, Maribelle is bringing Demoiselle and Dual Support Plus to your aura stack. This is going to make Robin an even more reliable tank and make this duo even better at providing an aura for the rest of your army. Plus, this pairing does a great job of mitigating Muriel's weaknesses. Her stats are not particularly great, especially her speed. Characters with low speed tend to do better as dedicated pair-up units. If they're never in the lead position, then their speed stat never matters. They're not going to double anything, and they're not going to get doubled by anything. So while Maribelle is always standing behind Robin, her low speed is never an issue, and this fixes her greatest weakness. By the same logic, Ricken also makes a great support unit for any of your female magic users, and, sort of like Saria, he can actually switch into physical classes like Cavalier in order to support a physical character if you want him to do that. We are going to talk about Saria later, but just remember she's naturally fast, and she can perform very well as a lead combat unit. having her stand behind Robin ends up actually being a little bit of a waste of her talents. I do think that Saria and Robin are a very strong pairing, but I've recently come around on the advantages of Robin Maribelle, and honestly, it is the build that I'm planning to use for pretty much all of my Iron Man attempts in the future. Oh, and for the top section of the map, it is 100% free. So feel free to give experience or build support points between any characters that you want while you pull these enemies away from their group one at a time. Yeah, the game actually lets us draw these enemies out one at a time. I feel like I'm playing normal mode again. For the next chapter, you have the option between delving into Chapter 6 immediately or making a detour into Side Story 2. To be frank, Chapter 6 is even harder than Chapter 5 on Lunatic Plus, and on top of that, you're going to get access to a shop that's going to sell more javelins and more hand axes if you head over to Side Story 2, so I highly recommend going there. In fact, I recently discovered a quirk in the enemy AI on Side Story 2 that turns the entire map into a free training grounds for almost any unit that you want to train. I've even used it to train some of the weakest, slowest characters like Ricken and Donald with zero risk. And I'm not kidding. If you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And for now, enjoy the rest of your day.